Well, welcome back to another one of my chats that I call Perspectives, and they really are spontaneous because I just have an idea in my head or a thought or an impulse, and I decide to speak on that topic. And I have no notes. I really don't plan it. I just decide to say a few words on it and see see what comes. Um, this time, I'd like to speak about a question which I suppose combines the perspective on technology and evolution. Because the other day, a good friend of mine sent me a text which was the commentaries of the Slovenian philosopher Slavek Zizek, um, who was discussing his conversation with the Israeli historian philosopher Noah Harari. And this is Zizek talking about, making a few comments about what Harari says. And in this extract, I'll read it. Zizek says, as Harari points out, the most realist option of the biotechnology and computer algorithms joining their powers in producing bodies, brains, and minds will be a radical division, much stronger than the class division within human society itself. With the gap exploding between those who know how to engineer bodies and brains and those who do not, those who ride the train of progress will acquire divine abilities of creation and destruction, while those left behind will face extinction. Zizek is quoting Harari there. He goes on to say, the main threat is therefore that of the rise of a, quote, small and privileged elite of upgraded humans. These superhumans will enjoy unheard of abilities and unprecedented creativity, which will allow them to go on making many of the most important decisions in the world. However, most humans will not be upgraded, and they will consequently become an inferior caste, dominated by both computer algorithms and the new superhumans. Splitting humankind into biological castes will destroy the foundations of liberal ideology. End quote. So Zizek is quoting Harari there, saying that the new technologies coming along, the biotechnologies, will upgrade the humans, creating an elite caste of superhumans, which will then more or less take over and be the ones making the decisions. They will have unprecedented creativity, making them, giving them the most important decisions in the world. And the rest, the majority, will not be upgraded, and they will be dominated by the new superhumans. Now, that is Harari's view, which has been talked about on the internet as well. I think in many critical observers, Harari's observations are quite unpopular because he's been seen as representing the elite view, the Davos men or Davos crowd. But what this that I mean, people are talking about whether this represents an elite perspective or not, but fewer people are discussing the fact that this is a particular take on evolution. And in a way, this technological perception of the next evolution will be this techno-augmented human or superhuman is an update of Darwinian evolution. And Darwinian evolution has these jumps between species that supposedly adapt to the new environment. And also, mistakenly, people have talked about Darwinian evolution as representing the survival of the fittest. Now, Darwin never mentioned that term. Survival of the fittest was coined by a English sociologist, philosopher called Herbert Spencer. And that phrase, survival of the fittest, was brought together with Darwinian evolution and more or less has stuck with it ever since. So there's this notion, this popularism of this populist idea that evolution is about the survival of the fittest, and those groups that enter the niche better suited survive and everyone else falls away. And therefore technology is the new environment, the new niche. Whatever human fits into the technological environment will be the fittest, will survive. This is a very physical, exterior, two-dimensional view of evolution. It sees evolution purely as a physical process of bodies, capacities, physical traits that are more suited, therefore will dominate and survive, and the rest will die out. It has no understanding or conception of the evolution of consciousness, and that there might be non-physical forces that are behind evolution, that are pushing evolution. Again, this is the tendency of the dominant narrative of the physical 3D worldview, is that everything comes from us. We are the drivers of everything. Our bodies, human species, are the drivers of evolution. There is very little conception or understanding that evolution actually could be driving through us and pushing us, or pushing those people who are able to perceive those flows. There's little conception that evolution may be actually coming into the earth, coming into the creatures or human beings, and actually driving evolution from within, especially in humans with consciousness, in the fact that now humanity, to a large degree, for the most recent phase of its evolution, has been moving along the line of conscious evolution. And conscious evolution points to the fact that we can be aware of non-physical impulses and forces that are working through us, and that awareness aligns us with those energies, those impulses, and helps us to develop in a certain direction, helps us to unfold certain capacities, certain organs of perception. So it may be that those species and those humans that are perceptive to these non-physical forces, these evolutionary impulses that are coming in, and that can align themselves with those evolutionary impulses, maybe those humans that are more aligned to where the future is going. So it's a very different understanding. We have the physical understanding that evolution is just about physical adaptation, which again is a very exterior two-dimensional perception, and that these top so-called philosophers can only see evolution in physical terms is very limiting. It really shows the state of so-called mainstream accepted philosophy. But from my understanding and my perspective, I would say that evolution is working through non-physical impulses to a large degree, that can help to develop and transcend human consciousness. And the activation of these organs of perception would enable the human being to connect more to forces in the cosmos or the larger consciousness field, and would expand the human being's understanding, perceptive field, and range of consciousness. And then the human being would understand that the evolution on this planet is a part of a much greater evolutionary kind of bigger picture. So this is very different from the physical understanding of evolution, which is, that kind of technological evolution is predicated on the fact that we are physical beings living on a rock hurtling through space, and when we die, and there's nothing beyond. It doesn't take into account the metaphysical understanding of life, or what we may call the spiritual side of life, and that we are incarnated in physical bodies for a life experience. So to equate evolution purely physical is, as I said, a very limiting factor. So there seems to be a certain section of society which are very technologically minded in terms of evolution and only see progress as a technological possibility, i.e., if we do not evolve technologically and augment ourselves to be so-called superhuman, then we are not evolving, and we'll just stay stagnant as a physical carbon-based biological body, and then that's the end of humanity. Which I find it's quite incredible in this day and age that that is the leading edge so-called narrative thinking of science. We clearly have not come as a species to perceive and comprehend our evolutionary role in terms of the cosmos and in terms of the non-physical and the physical combination that we are. And so, referring back to the Harari comments that Zizek talked about, that for me is not going to be the future. There will be a certain segment of society pushing for a technological future in that direction, and that's a much bigger conversation in terms of technocracy, transhumanism. But what I sense coming down the line is forces coming in from the cosmos, evolutionary impulses that we can be aligned with, and we need to prepare for that. Because if we're not going to accept the technological progress as our future, we therefore need to be inwardly prepared to receive impulses and intuitions and let's say nudges of consciousness to help us guide us in the correct trajectory or alignment of evolutionary development, which is aligned with metaphysical forces in the cosmos and human consciousness. Now, this also reminds me of a long-standing historical contestation or struggle. And as they say, if you don't learn from history, then you are bound to repeat it. And in this context, I'm going to refer to quite a controversial subject of Atlantis. Now, many people, or the common perception of Atlantis, is usually as a mythology. It's highly criticized by the status quo, of course. But it's a serious subject in that, of course, we know of it mainly through the writings of Plato. And it's funny how the mainstream and the establishment accepts everything else Plato says and then tends to ignore the bit about Atlantis. More recently, of course, we have the quite a lot of serious talk about Atlantis from the Austrian philosopher, spiritual scientist Rudolf Steiner, and the American, they call him the sleeping prophet, Edgar Cayce. Now, Edgar Cayce did hundreds and hundreds of readings specifically on Atlantis, and also Rudolf Steiner did many talks about it. Now, combining what they both said, I'm not going to distinguish about what one said or the other, but combining what they both said, it seems that there were specifically two major groups, or I won't say groups, but kind of allegiances within Atlantis, and it was the struggle between these two groups that finally led to the collapse of Atlantis. Now, contrary to mythology, it did not collapse overnight with just one huge flood and then the next day it's gone. It actually, according to both Casey and Steiner, started a series of collapse over that lasted hundreds of years. And that, we had one wave of collapse that destroyed parts of the continent and then further collapse. And what this collapse and these environmental conditions were caused by was the misuse of high technology. And there were, as I said, there were two, let's say, call them groups. And they're called, especially by Casey, that one of the groups he refers to as the sons of the law of one. And the other group, the sons of Belial. Now, the sons of the law of one were those people aligned with what I would say the conscious evolutionary path. That they were the sons of the law of one, the law of unity, the one source. And they were aligned with, let's say, the inner development of the cosmos, and therefore they were very careful about using technology. The other group, the sons of Belial, and of course Belial has an interesting connotation with a related term in biblical terms, if you look that up. But the sons of Belial were those who wanted to dominate through technology, and they started to manipulate the high-end technology, which was the energy which fueled the continent of Atlantis, which was based on the two-eye stone, apparently, which was a kind of crystal that received energy from exterior and then concentrated it to send it out. A bit like a laser, really, concentrated energy. Now, we know in modern times what the dangers are of concentrated energy. We have only the atom bomb from the middle of the 20th century as a kind of primitive version of intense energy. I mean, today we have untold energy weapons, laser weapons, electromagnetic weapons, and far more. So it seems that the collapse of the civilization was this struggle between those who were aligned with the law of one, the inner development path, and those who wanted to dominate through a physical, technological domination, and that brought about the collapse of Atlantis. Now, whether we believe that information or not, it's still a case in point that some credible people have put these forward as a happening, an event. So take that understanding that our past, the human history, has been littered with a struggle between those who have dominated through technology and those who wanted to create an inner evolutionary path. And this has caused problems. And I think we can take that as a representative of what's happening in the world today. There are a small group of people who wish to dominate the rest through a technologized evolutionary path. And interesting that Edgar Casey said in the 20th century, when he was speaking around the 1940s, 1930s, that many Atlantean souls are reincarnating into the future to be here again. But that's another subject. So, in these times, and I'm speaking just 2 days ago, or 2 days later from the turning on of the new CERN experiment, the upgraded CERN experiment in Switzerland, which is looking supposedly at the origins of the universe and the Big Bang, but now is also looking at interdimensional pathways and interdimensional portals. And again, that is a privately funded, heavily funded organization that seems to have its own legal protection. So this all goes back to the text I was reading from Harari and Zizek, that there seem to be these contestations or these groupings between one small segment of society who's focusing on domination through a technological progress and adaptation of the human into technology augmentation, whereas I would say in this, from my perspective, that the aligned pathway for the future human is through a conscious internal development aligning with cosmic forces. And we may not have to come to that repetition of history, because it seems that if enough people can be prepared internally for the allowance of what is coming energetically, then the technological, physical domination may not push through. So maybe a long-winded way to discuss what I wanted to say about technological and inner evolution. So thanks for listening thus far.